I don't remember. Maybe people remember, but I'm pretty sure we got up to the heavy ones, the sixth one, the seventh and the eighth we didn't do. But before that, let's just give them again framework give the framework of what we're talking about. Let's look at the framework. So the whole path where we're talking the most advanced levels. We're talking about the compassion wing, which is the advanced stages of the practice, which imply that you need to have done the wisdom wing first. So if we look at the Lam Rim, we know it's called Lama Zopa very politely calls the first stages of practice in this packaging of the Buddha's teachings called the Lam Rim. He calls it the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. I like to call it junior school. We kind of, it's cliched, but it's totally perfect. It fits. It's colloquial, but it works. The next level of practice. So this first level, we abide by the laws of karma. So all the basic teachings about ethics. And it's to help us to discipline our body and speech. Why? Because we're driven by delusions and our body and speech do dumb things. They harm sentient beings. So we don't want future suffering. So we stop the causes now, which is harming others. This is the whole view about karma. We're the boss. What we think and do and say produces our future, which is a brand new idea to us. In our culture, we do not think like that, but this is the Buddha's view. The next level, we then get to the root of the problem, which is the mind. We start to unpack and unravel the delusions. We need to distinguish the delusions from the virtues. And they're distinctly different. This is unique to Buddha's psychological model, So we really become our own therapists now. So this whole first section, this first and second scopes, junior school and high school, is the wisdom wing. This is all the work you do to develop yourself into an amazing person. You get renunciation of suffering and its causes. You become a stable, disciplined, self-respectful, content person. Now we go to the compassion wing, where we continue to work on our mind. That never changes all the way from here to Buddhahood. But the reference point is different. The motivation is different. Here, the reason we're trying to break down our own delusions and lessen our delusions is to break down the barriers that ego and delusions have created between self and other. Because we're trying to get closer to sentient beings, because we now realize from having done the wisdom wing that we're all in the same boat. Everybody's causing their own suffering. Everybody wants to be happy. Nobody wants suffering, but we don't know the causes. This is the tragedy, and this is the basis of the great compassion of all the bodhisattvas, That we're ignorant. We don't realize we are the source of our own pain and happiness. We keep looking on the outside to find it, and we never will. It's very tragic. So here now we wanted to help sentient beings. We keep working on our own mind so we'll be qualified. So the first level of practice, it will be achieve bodhicitta. So we're really in that section. And then after we've accomplished bodhicitta, our final stages of practice, and we haven't discussed that here, I don't think, is the six, we practice the six perfections. So the bodhisattva goes from life to life to life, perfecting these different practices in order to finally become a Buddha. So I think here we're mainly we've been going through the section that culminates in the accomplishment of this bodhicitta, this paradigm shift in the mind. And it's so astonishing when you read the qualities of a bodhisattva. You hear Lama Zopa teach about what a bodhisattva is like, and it's like science fiction. It's so incredible. Their qualities are so amazing. They're way beyond what we would imagine in modern psychology. In fact, modern psychology would think a bodhisattva, if you have the qualities they've got, that they're mentally ill, Because when you finally achieve bodhicitta, there's no longer the thought of I. It's not a possibility. You've cut all the nonsense, You've cut all the nonsense. When you've got bodhicitta, you haven't realized even emptiness yet. You haven't realized the selflessness, but you've so clearly realized the incredible suffering of sentient beings and this incredible energy that you have that causes you to only want to benefit others, It's extraordinary. The qualities are amazing, and this is why they call courageous compassion, fearless compassion, because there's nothing you won't do to benefit sentient beings. So you've really subdued ego to an incredible degree, You're no longer confused by your attachment and aversion and the delusions are so subdued, even if you haven't realized emptiness yet. You're so astonishing, this levels of love and compassion, which culminate in this bodhicitta. So as I said last week, I think we went through the 8 verses. These seemingly simple little verses, but which really are quite outrageous. The practices of a person trying to accomplish this bodhicitta, and it's the whole approach is particular. This whole approach this is really the courageous compassion. The whole approach of happily welcoming problems and difficulties and obstacles, because that's the best way to test yourself, to push past your limits and to smash self-cherishing, to smash attachment and all the ridiculous delusions, which are why we suffer so terribly and why we harm others. So the bodhisattva is courageous because, the normal, this is within where we talk about the 8 worldly dharmas. We talked about this, I'm quite sure we did, where we're trying to smash these viewpoints, these primordial ways that attachment works that keep us in our comfort zone. I mean, in other words, we have love and we have compassion now. We do have, but it's very limited. As soon as it starts getting a bit threatening, as soon as the children become a bit crazy, as soon as the husband becomes horrible, then, your limits are too much and you can't cope and you forget about your compassion. It's out the window, So the bodhisattvas, because they want to smash delusions, because that's what's holding them back from becoming a Buddha. So they welcome and they greet and they want the toughest situations, the toughest, most difficult times. So those 8 verses were exactly about that. One of those verses, especially the most intense one was when, the person you've loved, the person you've devoted your life to. And you can even think of a person who's been married to somebody, devoted your life to this person, or your child, I think, especially your beloved child, whom you've, as it says in the verse, whom you have great hopes for, whom you've given everything to, and they turn against you. This would be, you'd see this person as your guru. This is really hard to bear, this is so painful. The way we suffer in life is mainly in relation to other people, but the bodhisattvas welcome those situations, because why? Not because they're martyrs, not because they're masochists. It's because they're trying to smash delusion. So the quickest way to smash attachment is to give attachment what it doesn't want, which is insults and abuse, rejection. So that smashes the delusions. Now that's really courageous level of practice. If we look into our lives and see how painful it is when something happens that we don't want, especially when it comes to people, especially when it comes to people we're close to, it's unbearable. We go mad. This is the source of the pain and suffering of most people, when they're rejected and blamed and, and put aside and given up, and people are angry at us, people criticize us. It's beyond pain. So this whole level of practice for the bodhisattvas is incredible, incredible. These aspiring bodhisattvas. They want to as Lama Zopa says, we need to learn to like problems like we like ice cream. I mean, such a silly, cute way of putting it, but it's sort of ridiculous, but it's so clear. This is not natural. This is not what we call natural, This is the bodhisattva's practice. They will greet any problem, so happy. So I think the 7th verse, I'm pretty sure we went through them all, except for the 7th and 8th. So the 7th verse is basically, I think it's the source of this technique, that's the meditation technique, this whole approach that is really the point at which you will then do that, make that paradigm shift and achieve bodhicitta, that practice called Tonglen. And for some reason, Western people, modern people love this practice, but it's an outrageous practice. Maybe we misunderstand it. I think one of the commonest misunderstandings about it is that it's a healing technique. So, you've got a person who's got your friend is sick, your beloved is sick, so you do Tonglen. But actually, it's not a healing technique. It's actually a technique to help you smash your delusions, to get you to have the courageous attitude that you would rather have that person suffering than them, and you would rather they have your happiness instead of you. I mean, it's a pretty insane concept. That's what Tonglen is. It's outrageous, as it says in the text. You secretly taking on upon yourself other people's suffering and giving them all your good qualities. So it's basically, so the thing is, this Tonglen, people do it and you use your breath. So when you visualize a person in front of you, let's say who's sick, and start with your child. I mean, happily to do it for a child. We talked about this last week, You visualize your child being sick. So when you breathe in, you imagine you're taking upon yourself their suffering. You imagine their suffering disappearing from them, and it makes you so happy. So the point is here, it is not a healing technique. It is not to make your child better. It's you using your sick child as grist for your mill to help you develop this outrageous, courageous attitude that I would rather have the sickness than them. When I asked Wolfgang last week, what you do for your child? He said, no question, of course, we do that, I think we did discuss this last week. This is Tonglen. It's outrageous. And then when you breathe out, you imagine giving your happiness, giving your kindness, giving your money, giving your health and wealth to the person, rather they be happy. So the thing is, it's not a question of trying to get, you're not trying to get their sickness. You're not trying to heal their sickness. It's using that as a way of becoming courageous in your wish to take the wish that if you could, you would take upon yourself this suffering. Now, I'm sure we talked about it. Didn't I tell the story about Harry last week? I did, falling off the mountain. There, exactly. That's Tong. That's kind of Tonglen in person, isn't it? So we did discuss this. This is where it really, this is finally when it culminates in this bodhicitta. When finally this bodhicitta is stable in your mind, when others are more important than you. One of the criteria, there are many criteria, and the first criterion would be that there's no longer the thought of having accomplished bodhicitta. There's no longer the thought of I arising in your mind. I mean, you're not silly and don't realize you're not I. Of course, you know you're I as opposed to another I. But the usual way that the I is the center player in our mind. Everything for us is in reference to the I. You're tired, so I am tired, so I go to sleep. I am not tired, I will get up. I am hungry, I will eat. You know, or I is everything, you know, we are kind, we are compassionate, we do think of others, but the concept of I and getting what I want is pretty primordial in all of us. And we can't even imagine in modern psychology and modern neuroscience that you'd be any other way. If we would think you could be any other way, like I said before, you think you're mentally ill. So the idea of a bodhisattva is really weird in the ordinary world, you know. Because the ordinary world factors in self-centeredness, it factors in ego grasping, it factors in attachment, it factors in selfishness. Not a lot, hopefully, but we can't imagine a person free of all that, which is why this is so radical. But this is what we're aiming for, you know, one step at a time. Not just to get feelings of it occasionally, it's got to be a stable realization, you know. So the 8th verse, I don't think we talked about that one. It's maybe we did. It says about giving up the 8 worldly dharmas and seeing everything is illusory. Did we talk about the 8th one? Does anybody remember? No? Okay, I'll look at it. Let's look at it. I had my document here. Oh, wrong document. God, what happened? Got last time's document. Hang on. Here it is. Okay. It's this practice right at the back of the book. Hang on, I get organized here. All right. The 8th verse. Here's the 8th verse. Undefiled by the stains of the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns, may I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the bondage of attachment. So it's a mixture of things in here. You know, perceiving all phenomena as illusory is just really the conventional way of presenting how things exist, as opposed to the ultimate way, which would say that everything is empty of existing from its own side. You know how they talk about, I mean, even Lama Zopa would say, actually, you'd say everything is like an illusion. So seeing phenomena as illusory, it means seeing them as having no intrinsic nature, which of course is emptiness. But the first line is about giving up attachment at this more primordial level. And I don't remember when we talked about it. I'm so sorry, but there's no harm in hearing it again. In general, in the first stages of practice, you learn to control your body and speech. That's all about karma. That's the main practice in the first level of practice. You harness your body and speech. You discipline yourself. You have a good life. You calm your crazy body and speech down, the servants of your mind. Then you get to the next level and you really start to unpack and unravel the mind. And you get to see, as it's taught in the Four Noble Truths, that essentially attachment is the main cause of our suffering in daily life. Well, at that level of understanding attachment, we talk about the gross level of attachment to sex, attachment to food, attachment to money, attachment to the sensory objects, in other words, which is, of course, the major one for most of us, because we're living in this body. Our mind is in this body. And this body is basically a body of the 5 senses. And we're living in a world constructed of the 5 sense objects. Buddha calls this a desire realm, which is literally what it means. It's this body and this mind and this body of ours is literally karmically the creation of our own past attachment. We've created these 5 senses. We've created these holes that demand feeding every day, you know. So we are embodied beings, and they're the body of the 5 senses, and the world are basically the 5 sense objects. Think about it, you know. And we live our lives in this way according to the 5 sense objects. So we try to avoid the ugly things and we try to get the nice ones. This is what we think is happiness and suffering, It's a very gross level of existence. So our main concern there is learning to see this attachment, realize it's a complete lie, it's a misconception, it leads us up garden paths, that following attachment won't bring you the happiness we want. It's not meant to be sort of cruel and unkind. It's a technical point. And when we can understand this, not as just Buddha being mean to us and saying we're not allowed to have happiness, because our trouble is we conflate happiness and attachment, but they're completely separate, completely different states of mind. So that main level there, we're trying to calm down the attachment, which causes us to have uncontrolled body and speech, which causes us to harm sentient beings, which causes us future suffering. So the whole first scope and second scope of practice is for your benefit. You're the beneficiary. So from the result of this is you become a very stable, controlled, disciplined, self-respectful human being, And then you're really qualified now to continue to work on your mind in the compassion wing. So here in the compassion wing, particularly this verse, this is more advanced levels where we're trying to get bodhicitta, they talk about attachment at a subtler level. It's a more pervasive way. Because we are an embodied being driven by the delusions, driven by attachment. This body is the body of attachment. Then we look at the attachment in this more nuanced, more subtle, more pervasive way. And that's what they mean by these 8 worldly concerns. It's a kind of a curious phrase. Sometimes you see it called the 8 worldly dharmas. What it's referring to is attachment in 8 different ways, basically. 4 pairs of attachment that are really underlying. It's not just you're trying to calm your attachment to the cake. You're not trying to just calm your attachment to the money. Here we're trying to calm attachment at the most primordial level, because we're going to notice when we go through these 4 pairs that they are continuously in our mind. They're continuously there to one degree or another. Some of us more than other, depending on the personality you've got. And this is where we can look at attachment as basically at the level of being an assumption, quite subtle in the mind, quite instinctive. So the first pair of these 8 is this constant assumption, this attachment, this assumption that happiness is when I have good feelings. And we think, well, of course, good feelings are called happiness. What are you talking about? So that means we're constantly craving, hoping for, manipulating to get, controlling to get, anticipating, yearning for pleasant feelings. Now, this is a really simple word, but let me explain, okay? When you study Buddhist psychology back in high school, in the middle scope, and you learn about the mind, which we've talked about often enough, we can divide all the states of mind into 3 categories. And the third category, the first is negative, the second is positive, the neurotic ones, the deluded ones, and the virtuous ones. And now we've got the mechanics of the mind. I like to call them that. So this is called concentration, good memory, intention, attention, discrimination, all these simple English words that refer to very specific parts of our mental consciousness that enable us to function. So mindfulness, for example, is really simply the ability to not forget what you're doing moment by moment. It's not a virtue in its nature. It's not virtuous. It's not holy. People call it like that. No, it's simply the ability to not forget what you're doing. I mean, as Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. Everybody needs mindfulness, good memory, not forgetting what you're doing. If you're making a cake and you forget whether you put the sugar in or not, you'll be in trouble. You've got to have a continuity of what's going without, and that's where concentration eventually kicks in, when you really get it. So we need to hone that to an incredible degree so that we can then start to work on our mind. Now, in that category, the mechanics of the mind, there's one that's called feeling. And this is very confusing to us. That sounds like emotion. It's not something like that at all. And as far as this Buddha's view is concerned, based on the type of body we have, this mind we have, these 5 senses, we only have 3 kinds of feelings. There's a very specific use of this word. There are pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, and neutral feelings. Well, let's forget the neutral, please. We couldn't care about them. Then we've got pleasant and unpleasant. Well, this is a really crucial point. We say the word happiness. Well, that's equivalent to pleasant feeling. Another word for pleasant feeling is the word happiness. But our trouble with happiness, when we say happiness, because we're so addicted to believing that the outside world is the cause of my happiness, we actually conflate the external experience and the feeling of happiness. That's a complete mistake. So when you ask me to tell me about my happiness, I'll tell you about what Andrew did for me, how kind he was. In my mind, I remember Andrew being generous to me. That's not happiness. Happiness is a state of mind. It's called a pleasant feeling. So we know you can have a spectrum of pleasant feelings. You can have mild pleasant feelings to as to rapture, ecstasy. I mean, I've never used that. I've never had ecstasy. I'm waiting, one day it might happen. Don't have those words, but also there's a level of happy feelings, pleasant feelings, happiness, pleasure. They are synonymous. Then you've got unpleasant feelings or suffering. Again, if you ask me, tell me about your suffering, Robina, I'll tell you all the terrible things Andrew did to me, because I'm convinced they are the cause of suffering. So much so that I think they are the suffering. No, they're just the events. There's the outside event. The happiness and suffering, the pleasure and displeasure are in my mind. This is unbelievably necessary and important to understand. So, basically, attachment's job, attachment, which is a delusion, this vampire in us, its job throughout the day is to constantly search and find a thing, a sound, a smell, a taste, a person, an event, such that when we have contact with it, pleasant feelings are triggered. That's the mechanism. But we conflate attachment and pleasant feelings. As Lama Zopa says, when we hear I've got to give up attachment, we go, oh, I've got to give up my happiness. I've got to give up my heart, because we're not clear about the definitions. This is so important to understand. So Buddha is not trying to get us to give up pleasure and happiness. His methods are to get us to get so much happiness we won't believe it. But we can't hear it like that. We hear it as punitive. And don't do this and don't do that, because we don't study it properly. We're not analytical enough. So the point is here, attachment's job is in there every second like a vampire, looking for, craving for, and then looking for, and then controlling to get, and then getting the thing that we are convinced that when I get it will trigger pleasant feelings. That's attachment's job. So what we're trying to do in the 8 worldly dharmas is look more subtle level, how this is driving everything we think and do and say, and we're learning to try and give it up. So the first pair of these two types of attachment, this first pair of attachment, these 8 worldly concerns, the first one is the assumption every second that I must get the pleasant feelings. And so when I've got pleasant feelings, then I call that happiness. And then what happens is the millisecond, let's say my house is nice and cozy on this chilly days, it's like -2 degrees here, and it's a chilly day, -2 Celsius, So it's warm in this house. It's lovely. It's very pleasant. So in other words, my attachment is getting what it wants. It's getting pleasant feelings. I'm having pleasant feelings because the temperature is very cozy. Now, if I walk outside to empty my bin, when they come on Tuesdays, and I wheel my bin out, actually, somebody else wheels it for me, but if I did it, as soon as I open the front door, the house is very insulated. What am I hit by? This intensely cold, bitter cold air. Now, listen to this. Listen to this. My attachment is getting what it wants every second in this warm house, meaning I'm getting the warmth I want. But the second I open that door, what arises is aversion. Oh, my God, this is so cold. So what happens is attachment now changes from attachment to getting pleasant feelings, and attachment now becomes attachment to being free of unpleasant feelings. So every second I'm outside, I'm anticipating coming in. I'm anticipating of this cold stopping. I'm anticipating the unpleasant feelings stopping. So we go between these two all day, every day of our lives mindlessly. And we wonder why we have mental breakdowns. Because 1,000 times a day, you're going to meet something that will trigger an unpleasant feeling, won't you? Think about your life. You'll hear a noise that's too loud. Your husband won't answer you perfectly. The child won't do what you want immediately. Something won't be right. The statement, your bank account hasn't got the right thing. 1,000 baby events a day that we don't ever pay attention to, that will be what your attachment doesn't want. So unless you're a yogi who's worked on your mind, your response to that thing will be annoyance, irritation, aversion. I don't want this. You might be controlled, you might be disciplined, but your mind is not happy. That's unpleasant feelings. And attachment now is shifting to be free of these unpleasant feelings. So this attachment is continuous every second of the day. That's why we have to become conscious. And so what we have to do is greet that cold. See it as good. You don't want to be a martyr. That's not being a masochist. It's helping your mind be peaceful. Your mind is not peaceful if you're resisting that thing that's occurring. Your mind is not peaceful if when your child doesn't do what you want, you get upset. Your mind is not peaceful when if you break the cup while you're washing the dishes and you get annoyed. That's not peaceful. So we're trying to change our mind. We're trying to greet the thing that triggers unpleasant feelings and then stop and learn to greet it and be happy with that unpleasant feeling. Not because you're a martyr, but because that's what you're trying to make your mind happy every day. So we stop, in other words, we stop depending upon the external events to be the things that we think are necessary in order to have a pleasant feeling. We have to be in charge with having pleasant feelings from our own side. We have to decide, I am happy. We have to decide, oh yeah, that cold air is quite pleasant. I don't mind that cold air. We have to decide, it's okay when you break the cup, break another cake. We have to decide, plate. I have to decide when the child is doing not what I want. That's okay. And you work on your mind. You're fundamentally changing the usual way of responding to everything, because most of the time we're completely mindless. And that's why eventually it'll be the straw that breaks the camel's back and you want to kill your child or kill yourself, because we don't pay attention to our mind. We just call it normal to not like the cold weather on a cold day. We call it normal to not like a sweaty hot day on a hot day. We just say, oh, that's normal. But that's called attachment and aversion. And we run between them 1,000 times a day. But here, it's mainly framed as attachment every second. So the first level of attachment is always try to get the nice weather. And then the attachment shifts the moment the unnice weather comes to now trying to be free of the unnice weather. So attachment is continuous. And this is subtle, working at a subtle level of our mind, continuously there. And we don't ever pay attention and we don't think it's important. We don't look at this level of psychology in our mind, in our lives, you know. That's just the first pair of attachment. So we might have, some of us have very good discipline. Some of us have very good disciplined behavior. And actually, and it's marvelous if you do, but in a way it's a disadvantage because you don't notice your mind. You think you're so well behaved, but you don't. Like a friend of mine emailed recently and said, you know, he's very stable. He doesn't shout much, doesn't get angry, but it's all inside him. And so when something goes wrong, and then he'll explode. So he'd look on the surface as a very patient person, but that's just the behavior which is controlled, and that's important. But we've got to go deeper and change the very attitude, because attachment is an attitude and aversion is an attitude. We've got to change the attitude, you know. So the next pair is attachment, all the assumption all the time that when you get things, that's called happiness. And when you don't get things, so attachment is always wanting to get things. And then when you don't get things, attachment shifts to wanting to be free of not getting things. So it depends on your personality. Some people are very particularly attached to this one. Some people not so much. You've got to know your mind. Now, these next two are really pervasive. I mean, they're all pervasive. The next two, we're constantly yearning for, craving, expecting, attached to, hearing nice sounds with our name in them. And when we hear unpleasant sounds with our name in them, attachment shifts to wanting to be free of hearing those unpleasant sounds. So if you think this ordinary, it's a cute way of putting these things, but if you analyze your life, it's completely evident. We're all like this. We can't stand hearing even a small amount of criticism. It's so painful to hear those words. We will resist, we'll deny, we'll get upset, we'll think it's not fair, even the smallest criticism. I mean, we mightn't think we care, but we care terribly. And we are hungry to hear nice words. We are hungry. If a person ever starts to praise us, we're just like in heaven. We might pretend we're not. We're yearning to hear those praising words, you know. We might think that we're like this because we don't pay much attention. So we're continuously yearning to hear nice words with our name in it, and we're continuously yearning to be free of hearing unnice words with our name in them. Think about it. It's called praise and blame. There's the last two, and they can seem similar to this last lot, the previous ones. But you listen. They call this attachment to reputation. And it sounds very kind of grand, but think about it. This one, I think, this is the closest to ego grasping. This is the closest to the way ignorance, the maripa, the grasping at the intrinsic me. I think, it seems to me. And I say, this is the last one to go. Since we're born, because we're a separate person, and we've got mummy out there, and we've got daddy out there, and we're learning to be little people when we're tiny, aren't we? We're learning to respond to the world. So as we get older, we're all the time checking how mummy responds to us. And we want to, you see, we want to be a good girl. Wanting to be a good girl means you want to be seen to be a good girl. You want to do what mummy says, because then you'll have a good reputation. It's very mixed with praise as well. But so we're always judging what we do. We're judging and adjusting our behavior according to the way the person out there responds to us. It's really like sort of like we're completely split in half, you know. In other words, we've got this attachment causes us to not have any strong, valid, healthy sense of who I am in myself. We're always judging ourselves in reference to how we are seen by others. Think about this. This is the worst pain. They say the yogis in the mountains who've given up everything are still thinking about what the people in the village are thinking about them. This is in our head all the time. The way we have conversations with people, the way we want to talk to people inside our mind. We want to try to tell the person, I didn't say that, and I did do this. And what do you mean this one? When as soon as we come home from work and we see some weird thing on the freeway, all we're doing in our mind is can't wait to get home to tell Andrew. We all the time have to be telling other people, especially if we have a friend, telling our partner, we tell them everything. We call it sharing, but basically it's wanting their approval. Why is it we're not content to have an experience without having to share it and get somebody else's opinion about it? Think about it. Loneliness is a really good example of this one. Loneliness is the assumption that I'm nothing on my own. Think about this for a minute. It's very bizarre that I'm somehow nothing unless I've got somebody to share my thoughts with. I mean, I'm not saying it's not human nature to have friends. It is. It's marvelous to have friends. It's marvelous to share things. It's marvelous to love other people and be compassionate and be generous. But when we see this particular aspect of attachment, it's like this is the loneliness, the sense of being nothing and nobody. Look at the people living in their houses, completely depressed, not knowing how to process their own thoughts, having no sense of their own value. Just like they're locked away. We've got this terrible disconnect between who we think we are and the rest of the world. You know, it's very painful. This is the yearning to be seen and heard by others. Speak even more simply, it's the craving to be liked. Think about it. The assumption being that unless someone else says I'm a good person, then I mustn't be a good person. This is very, very bizarre if you think about it. The Buddha is saying everything we are is already in here, and we have to discover it. We have to become it. And then, of course, on the compassion wing, we then become social beings and we act for others. But right now we walk around like this lonely, broken half person, yearning and hoping someone out there will make me feel better. That's the depth of this attachment. This is the grossest level of our suffering. We've all got it to one degree or another. So to give up these, so the way they talk about these 8 worldly concerns is because these levels of attachment are so pervasive, they determine the choices we make, which are necessarily self-centered. So we'll adjust our behavior so we can get praise. We'll adjust our behavior so we won't get criticism. We'll adjust our behavior so we get liked by somebody. We'll adjust our behavior so we won't not be liked. We're always adjusting ourselves to fit in this external thing. It's very demented. It's very mentally suffering, you know. So we've got to become these authentic, content, fulfilled, joyful, happy people in ourselves. It doesn't mean you cut off from people. That's not what's being said. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's learning to be stable and clear, coming from the right motivation within ourselves. Then we will make the right choices, even if they're the tough choices. The 8 worldly concerns. It's attachment in 8 different ways at the most primordial level. Any questions about all that? Any questions? Any questions, Andrew? Or anybody? Huh? Yes, Wolfgang.
Yeah, if there are no questions, Venerable Robina. Luckily, I was able to give up attachment to food and alcohol.
Right, good.
But I don't feel more happy.
So maybe you haven't really given up attachment then. Maybe you just.
No, I don't need it. I don't want it. I don't need it. But I don't feel now that I feel more happier.
Well, then what I'm saying is that's the proof that you haven't given up attachment, if that's the case, because giving up attachment brings more contentment. I mean, if they've only given up attachment to some things, then maybe these more pervasive levels of attachment. I mean, the point is, Wolfgang, these subtle levels of attachment finally go when we've realized emptiness. So it's a long way to go before they're not there. But, you're starting somewhere. But part of the thing, perhaps also, that the contentment has to come when you delight and rejoice in the fact that you've given up attachment to food. And so maybe you don't rejoice, maybe you don't think happy thoughts about it, because happiness, you see, this is what's interesting. Happiness, we think of it, I mean, I don't quite know what you mean by happiness, but I got a feeling in our culture, we tend to think happiness means like laughing and light and feeling like that. But happiness can be having positive thoughts, and we're training our mind to be happy. And you mean you could train your mind to be positive and optimistic and virtuous. So if you've given up attachment to food, etc., you should delight every day. The Lamas say one of the most crucial practices we need to do, they call it rejoicing. And it sounds kind of silly, but we've got to be delighted, because when the mind is positive, when the mind is rejoicing in your good qualities, or even if you look at someone else and you delight in their good qualities, you're going to notice that's what happiness is. Happiness is having positive thoughts. Happiness isn't just doing an action. You mightn't need it. But so instead of the kind of more nihilistic one of giving up something and leaving nothing in its place, what you should leave in its place is more contentment and a delight in your practice. And I can't stress this enough, Wolfgang. I don't think we do it. It's positive. Happiness is having positive thoughts, not just having a nice feeling. It's positive.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah.
And delighting. And that's where when you see people who are very kind and they rejoice and delight in other people's qualities, you can tell that they're happy.
Yeah.
Do you understand my point? And I can
absolutely.
Even a simple example in my own family. I often mention this. There are 7 of us siblings, and we were brought up all very close in age. Like my mother actually had 8 babies in about 9 years. So there's one died, and there's 7 of us now, and we're all just within 10 years, and we're all old now. We're between 70 and 80 practically, all of us, almost. So the point is, we're typical siblings. We would argue and fight and shout and yell. We're all very dynamic, but we all kind of love each other. But over the last 10, 20 years, I've mentioned this many times, we're all very different. We've got a lot of similarities, but often when you see the differences more than the similarities, all you do is see the differences, isn't it? So you're always fighting, arguing, criticizing each other behind your backs, which is miserable. That's not happy. So I can see with us over the last 20 years, we've got this unspoken agreement, and it's kind of grown between us, that we never discuss things we don't agree with, just because there's no point in fighting. And we never talk about each other in a negative way behind our backs. So what I'm even seeing is, which is unusual among siblings, unless you practice it, we are very delighted in each other and rejoice in each other's qualities. So what I see is we're genuinely happy when we're together, because we're laughing and smiling, rejoicing in each other's qualities and rejoicing in our own qualities. You understand what I'm trying to say, Wolfgang? So it's not give up the food, yes, it's attachment, but then add happiness on top, delight in it, rejoice in it. And having positive thoughts is what brings happy feelings. I really mean that.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you very much.
I understand your nature seems a bit stoic, that's okay, that's great, but add some joy to it. and which is happy thoughts, positive thoughts, delighting thoughts in yourself and in others. Praise people, praise your wife, praise your children, praise people. Avoid saying negative things, avoid being negative, avoid, being all the time critical. Try and have positive thoughts. That's what brings internal joy.
Yeah. But we never do this in Germany.
But I'm sure you don't. I'm sure you don't. Well, you can try and practice. Try and be Californian. You live in California. But you hear my point.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. Try it out. And I rejoice. I rejoice in your practice. You're great. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that you're happy. Keep moving. Very good point. Who else, people? You see, I think we forget to have happy thoughts. We think that sounds silly. We keep waiting for something to make us happy. We've got to decide to be happy now. It sounds like a joke. It's like Catch-22. You learn to be happy now. Learn to be content now. Delight in what food you've got. Delight in the nice things. I delight in my nice warmth. I delight in this nice furniture. I delight in this comfortable house. You have a happy thought. You've got to cultivate happy thoughts. Don't be stupid. If someone's running with you a gun, you don't say, oh, the nice man with a gun. You get out of his way, okay? But have happy, positive, optimistic thoughts. It's very necessary, and we have to cultivate them consciously, especially rejoicing in ourselves. This is so profound, I can't tell you. What else, people? Any other questions? No, okay. Yes, good. Go, Wendy.
In the 12, do you know anything about the 12 steps, Robina?
I've heard about it, absolutely, many, many times from many people.
So they make a decision to turn their will and their lives over to a higher power, right?
Right, exactly. I've heard that.
What would the equivalent be in Buddhism?
I know. Well, they usually mean a creator, don't they?
Yes, I do. It's a creator of your connection, right? So
okay, that's fine. So the Buddhist one, because if you're Tibetan Buddhist, you would have, you do respect Buddha, you have your spiritual teacher, you have your relationship with your spiritual teacher. That would easily be the equivalent for a Buddhist, but not every Buddhist has a spiritual teacher. But that's a very special relationship that you cultivate if you're a Tibetan Buddhist, because you're seeing that human being in front of you as the embodiment of the Buddha. So you don't see them as your creator. You don't see them as the person who approves of you and punishes you and rewards you, which is the usual way we see things. But it's a person you want to become like. So you can have that. You wouldn't call it a higher power, but you'd call it a person that you revere and look to and want to become like. I think that's the equivalent, and that would be very comfortable, a very comfortable equivalent. But because many people think, well, Buddhists don't have a creator, then what am I going to turn to, But I think we all are human. We all need someone to turn to. We all need someone to revere, not in a silly way, but in an intelligent way. If you're trying to play tennis, you can't just do it on your own in your backyard. You've got to have a coach who cares for you, who shows you how to play tennis. You've got to want to please that tennis player. And we're all human. Like Lama Yeshe says, we're all dying for love. We've got to use it in a very wise way, not in an attached, silly way, as a way to nourish ourselves. So, if you're playing tennis, you want to please Federer. If your Federer's your coach, you want to please him. And then he praises you or he criticizes you so you can keep growing. So we all need someone like that. And that really is the meaning of what a guru is in Tibetan Buddhism. In Buddhism, it's very simple. It's a person you want to become like. As Lama Yeshe said, Buddha's dead, So we need a person in human form who looks like me, whom we have decided is the Buddha for us. We've got to choose that person. Don't just jump in and believe anybody. You choose, you select your guru, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, because you're going to he says, choose your guru very carefully because you're going to end up like them. So it's a very personal relationship you develop with somebody whom you look to, whom you want to become like. That's good enough for me. That's marvelous. We always need someone to look to like that, whether you're studying music, math, karate, anything. We need the human contact. As Lama Yeshe said, Buddha's dead. but the Four Noble Truths will only become real for me when I hear it from the mouth of another human. So that's the person. I think that's an easy equivalent.
So could you say that you're transforming your need for validation, your need, like the stuff you were talking about? That you're
yes, exactly, Wendy. Yeah, I think it's really true. We've all got it at a craving level, but you lift it up. If you're trying to become the best musician on the planet, you want to please your music teacher. That's good, because it's not just to satisfy you in a greedy way, it's to help you become the best musician. And that means you will be happy if your musician teacher shouts at you because you know they want the best from you. Yeah, otherwise it's just attachment and it drags you down to hell. Yes, exactly, Wendy. Very skillful needs.
Thank you.
What else, people? Anybody? So the last line then says, so of the last two lines, so may I, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory. Well, that sounds kind of cute, doesn't it? All phenomena as illusory. So the meaning here is, it's the meaning of it's the meaning of emptiness, you know. It's the meaning that's implied throughout all of Buddha's teachings. That nothing is, I mean, we have these lovely sayings, nothing is set in stone. That's a profound statement. Our mothers taught us this. Nothing is set in stone. That means it's flexible. As His Holiness said one time, you know, someone said, how do I apply emptiness in daily life? Which always confuses us, that word. Well, that's the ultimate way of saying how things exist. But the conventional way of saying how things exist, which is the flip side of the coin, is that you simply see things from a different point of view. In other words, he's saying, you know, it's not set in stone. Don't be rigid about it. Don't be fixed about it. See it from another point of view. That is the meaning of illusory, that things appear. You see, the Buddha's saying, as Lama Zopa puts it, the various delusions in our mind, like ego grasping, the root one, attachment, anger, jealousy, depression, anxiety, all these neurotic states of mind that have a particular function, one, of being very disturbing, but crucially, two, of misleading us. If I've got my attachment glasses on, you know, I'll be all hungry and needy for Andrew. I'll watch everything he does and hope he loves me and try and please him in a neurotic way. So I'm over exaggerating his value, basically, which implies I'm undervaluing my own value. That's the implication. That's not realistic, Buddha says. And then when the mind is like that, you're very stuck because I have this assumption. So as soon as Andrew doesn't look at me perfectly at exactly the time I wanted to look at me and give me the total response that I want, I'll have a panic attack and I'll be convinced he doesn't love me anymore. So the mind is so kind of tortured and so rigid. When I'm angry with Andrew, which is attachment not getting what it wants, then I believe totally he's an ugly person, set in stone, definitely ugly from his side, as if ugliness is coursing in his veins along with his blood. So we're running between seeing his divine and seeing him as ugly. We see the world like this. We're going from pillar to post, thinking everything's gorgeous or everything's ugly all the time. So everything is always, when we see it that way, we believe it's that way permanently and forever and in itself. So our minds are just very rigid, very stubborn, very stuck, very set in stone. And all Buddha's saying is, honey child, things aren't like that. They're more nuanced, they're more subtle, they're more, everything is according to perspective. And that's really obvious. I mean, simple examples, you know. Everything's a question of perspective. If you don't see the whole picture of something, you just see one part of it. So you can't have the whole understanding. If I just walk past somebody, I turn around the corner and I see Andrew punch someone in the nose, so I immediately have a viewpoint because I don't see the whole picture. I didn't see what happened just before that, which this person was going to try to kill Andrew, and Andrew, out of compassion, is trying to subdue this person. But I didn't see the whole picture. So we never see the whole picture. We just see our narrow-minded through the tunnel of our own tunnel vision. Tunnel vision, another great view, another amazing way to put it. Everything we see, it's tunnel vision. It's set in stone. Everything is according to how I think it and I believe it. And so deep is this assumption that things are the way I think they are, that I don't even think that I have a viewpoint. I just think what I'm seeing is in the object true. So seeing things from a different perspective. So illusory really just means they're not the way you think. Don't think it is tricky saying that. It's not. So as Lama Zopa says, in relation to these two truths, dependent arising and emptiness, two ways of presenting how things actually exist kind of finally. As Lama Zopa says, we have realized that nothing is set in stone. I'm using that consciously. Nothing is set in stone. There's not an atom of anything that's set in stone, concrete, solid, from its own side, inherent, real, solid, definite. There's not an atom of that in anything. When you realize that, it's as if there's nothing there. But conventionally, there is something there. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. That's the yogi's way of seeing the two truths, dependent arising and emptiness, which is the shorthand for these two ways that things exist, these two ways, two perspectives we have to cultivate when we see things and events and people and our own self. This is the analysis we have to do to really understand the actual ontological status of things. This is not just the area of the fancy philosophers in the university. We all have to do this because that's how we get liberation. This is how we get liberation. We all have to be our own philosophers, you know, to understand the way things exist. So illusory is just the opposite of seeing them as set in stone, which doesn't mean they're all wishy-washy. Illusory doesn't deny clarity and correctness. You know, a cup is always a cup. A cup is a thing that holds your tea. That is not denied by the fact that it's not set in stone. That's not denied by the fact that it is illusory, although it sounds cute to us. Seeing things as illusory, seeing things as empty doesn't deny reality, whereas we hear it like that. We hear, oh, well, if everything is empty, then nothing matters. We become nihilistic. That's complete nihilism. It's complete nonsense. We've chucked the baby out with the bathwater. We've fallen into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says, you know. So this is tough stuff. We've got to squeeze our brain for this stuff. But all the stages of the path up to now are the preparation for us to really do this properly, one step at a time, you know. So why we always suffer, Buddha says, is we see everything set in stone. We see everything through the lenses of our attachment, our aversion, our arrogance, our low self-esteem, our pride, you name it. They're always there. One or other of all these delusions are always there, and they're determining the way things appear to us. And then we believe it is that. We're so concrete, so absolute in how we see things. Things don't exist like that. You know, of course, this is hard to see. But this is the point of all Buddhist teachings. Everything, all of Buddhist teachings culminate in this view about how things exist. Yes, Lorna.
So, Robina, I'm trying to understand this. So the illusion is the illusion partly that we think it's permanent, that it will always be this way.
Okay. So that's a very good point, Lorna. The Buddha's pointing out there are different levels at which we think things are set in stone. So one is that we think there's no causes for anything. I'm just this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born. That's a load of rubbish. That's ridiculous. That's the wrong view. Then we think things are set in stone in the sense that they'll be there for eternity. That's another wrong view. Then we, even more subtly, we then think that things have an inherent nature, which is about emptiness. And that's even a more subtle view underneath that one. We've got to go one step at a time and seeing these different wrong views. And you let one, then you go to the next, and you get ever more subtle, stripping away ever more subtle. So there's levels of views of difficulty and subtlety of different viewpoints. Yes, you're right. That's one of the viewpoints. And that's a major way we suffer. That's one of the first teachings we have to learn, that things absolutely change second by second. Things are not set in stone in that sense. You're absolutely right. And that's a major one we have to get used to. And if we can start to even realize that one, we'll already be a much happier person. Because at the moment, we just have an assumption. I'm permanent. It is permanent. The relationship's permanent. COVID-19 is permanent. Whatever way you look at it, we panic, you know. But if we know it's always changing, always impermanent, we'll be more, like they say, go with the flow. You'll be more wise. You won't be so freaked out when things go wrong. That's a major realization to get. And then our minds are ready for the subtler one about seeing how they have no intrinsic nature, which is even more subtle. Do you understand, Lorna?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Very good point. Thank you so much. Anything else, people? Nothing else? Yes, Wendy.
You said at one moment, you said you get to this point where it's so subtle it doesn't exist, but it
Yeah,
does.
that's how Lama Zopa says it. I'll try and say it again.
Yeah.
But give a bit of background to this, I think. Okay, let's give a bit of background. I think you've heard it before, but we'll say it. So that Lama Tsongkhapa says, our 14th century lineage Lama says, the best way to realize Buddha's teachings about the ultimate way that everything exists is to see it in the framework of how they do exist conventionally. He calls it the two truths. It's just flip sides of the same coin. It's two different ways of saying and seeing the same thing. So the first one, the shorthand for the first of these truths is called dependent arising or interdependence, that everything that does exist arises, exists in dependence upon various factors. First of all, things depend upon causes. This is an argument with the Hindu position before Buddha. He diverged in his own direction in relation to these different viewpoints. They assert there's an intrinsic, solid, set in stone self. The Christians call it a soul. The Greeks call it an essence. We call it ego, I suppose, in the West. And he argues with this at a very subtle level and says, this is so that that's the first level in which things depend upon something. They depend upon causes. Then the more subtle level is that everything that exists interdependently, exists dependent upon, contingent upon the bits and pieces that make them up. Everything exists, everything is made of parts. So then basically, yeah, and then the subtlest one is that everything exists in dependence upon, contingent upon the mind seeing it like that. That's the subtlest one. So let's talk about that one, because that's the most subtle. And it's the most subtle. And when we've realized this one, we've really cut the root of suffering. That basically, and it's not, in a way, not difficult to prove, although it's the subtlest, it seems like not difficult to prove it. The Buddha is basically saying that everything is made by our minds. I mean, that sounds so silly to us. He's not just meaning now, but he's meaning over eons of time. This universe itself is the product of conceptuality. It's a pretty abstract concept to us, but it's very crucial to understand this. If you understand Buddhism in more depth, we study it. So the thing is, we see everything according to the habits in our mind, basically. And so we see everything not just in terms of the habits in our mind, but, I mean, it's so clear. Nothing has an intrinsic nature. Simple examples. If I did Kung Fu, I used to study Kung Fu. And when I did Kung Fu, we would fight and we would punch each other and we would kick each other. Now, I didn't go and sue that person. In fact, if I got punched, my teacher, Mr. Lee, told me that I needed to apologize to the other person for not getting out of the way. So it's so clear that when I got punched in Kung Fu, I didn't burst into tears. I didn't accuse you of being my abuser and sue you. I apologized to you. So that proves there's nothing intrinsic in a punch that is bad. Now, that we don't like to hear that when your boyfriend punches you. We want to believe it's bad. But everything is in how you label it. And I think this is so simple, but we don't like it because we would rather believe it is intrinsically bad. How dare my boyfriend punch me? It is in its nature bad. Now, this sounds shocking to us when we use examples like this, but as Lama Zopa said, if you don't feel abused, where is the abuse? This is very shocking for us because we want to believe that bad things are set in stone. Now, as soon as we hear that, then we throw the baby out with the bathwater and we think, oh, I see, you're telling me that it's okay that if Andrew beats me up. No, that's too extreme. That's not being said. This doesn't deny morality. But the point is that the whole business, and that's why I use my example of my friend in prison. Her husband was executed. Even his head burst into flames when she went to the execution. She's in prison too. They were accused of killing police. They were completely innocent. She was in prison for 17 years. Most people go completely mad in that environment. We get that. Because we all want happiness. But she said at one point, I realized I couldn't change anything. But I knew they couldn't take my mind from me. So basically what she did in prison, and she wasn't a Buddhist, she changed the way she interpreted this nightmare. So she became a happier, wiser, more compassionate, more fulfilled, content human being living in this hell, because she was able to see it differently. That is something we all understand. We do it every day in different ways. We do it. The sister's mean to you, but you decide you'll forgive her. You'll decide it's okay, it doesn't matter, and you let go of it. You just proved there was nothing intrinsic about that thing that she said, even though she was being mean. It's how we see everything. This is the essence of what illusory means. This is the essence of emptiness. This is the essence of dependent arising. That everything is seen through the lenses of what's in our mind. I think we can hear this, but we just don't like it when it comes to extreme examples, because we mishear it. We give it, we make it concrete. Do you see what I'm trying to say, Wendy?
Yes.
We get this, I think we really do, but it's the toughest thing to ever practice. And that's why I love to use this example of this woman in prison. I know her now, she's out of prison now. In the 90s, she got out. She's, you know, a woman called Sunny. She was just incredible example. And this is exactly the teaching that Buddha's giving from the very beginning, that we can change our mind. And why should we? Because that is the causing of happiness. That's the cause of happiness. That she was happy to get the hell out of prison when she did get out, but she didn't go mad. She changed. They couldn't take my mind from me, she said. She said, I realized, and there she was in solitary for several years with a Bible. She did nothing wrong. I mean, these prisons are insane. They're out of their brains, these prisons. But she was on her own. On her own. Her children had been, she'd lost her children because her parents, after she'd been put into prison, her parents had died in a car accident. Her children had to be sent into the homes. Her husband got executed. His head burst into flames. She was at the execution. She was innocent. You can't even imagine the nightmare saying these words. She said, I knew I had a choice. I knew I could change my mind. That is so, she wasn't a Buddhist. She was a nice hippie, you know. That is just stupendous. That's the essence of what Buddha's saying. That's it. And that's the meaning of emptiness, that there's nothing intrinsic, because this is the point. If prison were intrinsically in itself, in the bricks, in the mortar, in the wardens, in the metal bars, in the barbed wire, if it were in itself ugly, she could never have been happy, because it wouldn't matter whether her mind saw it as good or bad. But the Buddha says the mind is the boss. This is the meaning of emptiness, the final meaning of emptiness, that there's nothing there that makes, as Lama Zopa says, when you've understood the emptiness, the illusory nature of that prison, when you've realized that, it's as if there is no prison, ultimately. But conventionally, there is a prison that does function in exactly the way that prisons are to do. They lock you in. Well, you know, you can't escape. You're seen as bad. That's a fact. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist, because everything depends on the way you observe it. Everything depends upon your perception of it. This is the essence of all of Buddha's teachings. And so basically he says, you want to be happy, baby? Well, change your mind, honey. Try and change the outside world too, no problem. But if you change your mind, you can guarantee happiness. That's it. That's what he's saying. We kind of get it to a degree, but we don't want to, we think it's chucking the baby out with the bath. We think it's becoming nihilistic. We think it means, oh, well, therefore Andrew can beat me up, or therefore it's good to be, prison's okay. No, that's nihilistic. The meaning is more subtle than that. It's more nuanced than that. In other words, seeing something as having no characteristic from its own side doesn't deny the reality that it was a prison and she was locked in. They're facts. So emptiness doesn't deny reality, and conventional reality doesn't deny illusory nature. These are putting the two truths together. You understand? So absolutely we see everything set in stone. No, that's not possible. Prison is bad. Andrew is bad. That is good in its bones. Nothing to do with me. I'm an innocent victim. That's how we see the whole world. We're completely cut off from the whole world. We see everything existing out there, having nothing to do with how I see it. This is just insanity, Buddha says, and that's how we live our lives. Do you understand? Yeah. What else, people? We've got 2 hours or 90 minutes, I forget. 2, okay, good. You have to ask me some questions, more questions, you people, good. We'll have to find another topic. We've done the 8 verses. We can continue talking about whatever you like. So ask me some questions. What would you like to talk about in this last 50 minutes? I mean, I can think of something, I always do, but it's up to you guys. Go on, something.
I have a question on
Sure.
what would be the level of karma to determine whether someone, like you talk about Sunny discovering wisdom through the suffering.
Yeah.
Like what would be, how does that play in a part? Because I feel like a lot of us that kind of discovered Buddhism, it was through
Suffering.
some sort of suffering.
No, it's true, Eric. I think, and the reason is because we tend to, when you think about this, it's a very good point, Eric. We all float along, and as long as attachment's getting what it wants, which means as long as you get the cake when you want it, the girlfriend when you want it, the job when you want it, we take it for granted, don't we? We don't think there are causes. We just think, oh, aren't I lucky? Aren't I lucky? And we float along. So we don't, and because of that, we don't notice what's going on inside us. We don't even think there's much going on inside us at all because that's not our culture. And it's only when the girlfriend leaves you or you get accused of raping somebody when you didn't, or you get chucked onto death row, whatever the experience is, that's when we get the wake-up call. That's when we get the wake-up call. So we either go mad, or if we're brave enough, like Sunny, or brave enough like any of us, we can use that experience to learn about our mind. That's the Buddhist way of saying it. So the ideal is don't wait for the wake-up call to come. Don't wait for your girlfriend to leave you to realize everything's impermanent. Don't wait till you get cancer to realize that you could die. These are all facts anyway. And that's the whole Buddhist approach. Get in touch with facts, please. When you start to realize everything's impermanent, which is one of the levels of reality the Buddha talks about, like I said to Lorna, you realize things are impermanent. That's going to bring so much happiness already. We suffer so much because we think everything's permanent. When you fall in love with somebody, you think, as I always quote Nicole Kidman, when I read an interview with her, and she was with Tom Cruise. I love the woman. I'm trying to criticize her, but it was so clear. When they were together, in love, everything was perfect. They had 2 kids, life was wonderful. That can be very nice. That's wonderful when we have happiness, but we don't question it. So she said in the interview, at the end of the interview, she said, we will be together until we are 80. Now, it happened to be, I read this article after Tom Cruise had left for Penelope Cruz, and she was lying in despair. So then, this is what's interesting. When we have attachment to something, which means, and when attachment gets what it wants, you've got the Tom, you've got the kids, you've got the house, you've got the career, you're blissfully happy. I'm not criticizing, there's nothing wrong with that. But we assume, because it's so delicious, we don't realize there's an underlying assumption that somehow, because it's delicious today, it has to be delicious tomorrow. But we know that's not true. I mean, that's why we have so much suffering. Even just when you eat the piece of cake, which is so delicious in the first mouthful, we keep eating it, expecting the same pleasure. But why do you, after 5 pieces, want to vomit? Because things change, but we don't like change. So then it becomes as a shock to us. So indeed, when Tom did leave her, she was devastated. Because you assume because it's delicious, it won't change. And then the tragedy is when you go crashing down to despair, when your girlfriend leaves you, you now can't see the light at the end of your tunnel. And now you think the suffering will never end. So we have these misconceptions all the time. But we don't notice, we don't ever pay attention until the happiness stops. But that's too late. We've got to start seeing our mind before that. And then we'll be ready for the problems, because problems come. And if we're really navigating them properly, we can stay stable if we do the work on our mind. But we don't think that, and that's not part of our culture. We're so addicted to the outside world. We're so believing that the outside world is where happiness is, and we continually try to pursue it. And this is not moralistic. Nothing wrong with having money and sex and drugs. Just that when we neurotically rely upon it for happy feelings, then we're in trouble when it goes. So then all Buddha's saying is we can learn to be happy inside. Doesn't mean you want, and then you'll enjoy your cake even more. but you won't see it as permanent. And when it does finish, you won't be devastated. When your girlfriend does leave you, of course you'll be sad. You're a human being, but you won't be, your heart won't be ripped out because you didn't have this false assumption. So we've got to look at our assumptions, in other words. And Buddha says we're coming programmed into this life with countless lifetimes of deeply held assumptions. So we can start looking at them now, you know, and then be ready for the dramas. And they won't be dramas when they come because we'll be ready for them. You with me, Eric? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. What else, people? Any other points to bring up? So like I was saying to Lorna, in the Buddha's teachings, there are different levels of viewpoints, you know, different levels at which we have misconceptions, different levels at which we see things set in stone. So the permanent and impermanent one is a very easy one to see. And if we can really conquer that one, that prepares us for this subtler one of seeing that something has no intrinsic nature, which of course is more subtle and harder to understand. So we have to prepare our minds going one step at a time, which makes sense, you know. So when you know that things are impermanent, well, no, see, it's very interesting. Because we have this concrete view, let's say, you know, the Nicole and Tom example, or our own examples, doesn't matter. When you're in love with somebody, you just got a nice, even if you just have a nice house, maybe you don't have a lover, maybe you're not having all this excitement, but you've got a very pleasant life. And every day you wake up, the house is still there, the shops are still down the road, you're still okay. So what we tend to do is, because attachment is getting what it wants, which is to get pleasant experiences, to have everything working nicely, we don't realize, like I said just then to Eric, we have this deep assumption that somehow it'll be like this tomorrow. It's very deep in our mind. We assume it'll be like that tomorrow. But even just scientifically, there's no logic in that. We know from experience that things happen seemingly out of the blue. Okay, they're not out of the blue if you understand karma, but we don't know karma, so they seem to be out of the blue. Suddenly, Tom leaves you. Suddenly, you get cancer. Suddenly, the house, you know, you come home and the house is not there. It's been burned down. I mean, people have that experience. We're always shocked. So we think we're shocked because the house burned down. No, we're shocked because we assumed it would be there. This is so evident. This is so clear. We're all like this. And it's because of attachment, because we want our house to be there. So we have this, we put this lie on top of it. Well, of course it'll be there. We just assume, we have all these assumptions about everything. We're not living in reality at all, Buddha says. We're living in the cloud of our assumptions based on ego grasping and fear and attachment. And then we wonder why we suffer. You know, you think you're just your beautiful grandma's cup, you know, antique mug on the mantelpiece, and it breaks and you're devastated. And you think, why are you suffering, Robina? Oh, my grandma's cup broke. No, Buddha says, you're not suffering because your cup broke. You're suffering because you assumed it wouldn't break. We've got to look at assumptions. They're deep in our bones. But because they're so deep, we never pay attention. In fact, in our lives, until something goes wrong, we don't bother looking at our minds. That's our view in our culture. If you go to your therapist and you tell her you got annoyed because you dropped the cup while you were washing the dishes, she'll tell you to go home and shut up and just get on with life. Because we only want to know when you go to the therapist when you want to kill your husband, because we leave everything until too late. All Buddha's doing is it says we've got to get ahead of the game and start to pay attention to our mind and see these layers and layers and layers and layers of false assumptions that things are permanent, that things have no cause, that things aren't my fault, that things happen out of good luck and bad luck, that things have an intrinsic nature. These are all the layers of lies that Buddha would suggest we believe in. Okay, we have to investigate this. Don't just believe him. He might be talking a load of rubbish. You're the boss here. So basically knowing your mind is seeing your assumptions is the best way to put it, because these delusions are so deep, they're at the level of assumption. Yes.
Hi. Could you go back to the cup and from like a beginner's mind on how to perceive the cup? I was trying to follow you and it felt right, but I couldn't get it.
Which bit, darling? About the cup breaking, or which piece?
Yes, about the cup breaking. That if we perceive the cup, I think Could you please repeat
Okay, this is the one. Good. Thank you very much. Megan or Megan? How you say your name?
like an egg, Megan.
Okay, good, darling, Megan. So listen, Megan, this particular viewpoint that I'm describing that Buddha says is deep in our bones at the level of an assumption, which is why we suffer so terribly, is fairly easy to prove. But we have this instinctive belief that things won't change. You understand that? So when we have beautiful grandma's cup on the mantelpiece and you see it there every day. So every day when you walk into the room, you expect the mug to be there because you know that's where it belongs. And even before you walk in the room, you already imagine the mug is there, don't you? Do you understand? And you're really attached to this beautiful antique piece of china, whatever it might be. And so first of all, because you're attached to it, which means you think about it when it's not there, you think about grandma, you think about its value, you think about it's an antique. So you're all attached to it, you think about it, that's attachment. So because you're attached to it, you want it to be there every day, don't you? And then one day you walk in and all you see is a bunch of broken pieces on the ground, you'll get a big shock naturally. So what's the logic of that? So we think, oh my God, I'm crying. Megan, why are you crying? Grandma's beautiful antique broke. You're devastated. It's so terrible when the thing we're attached to goes, like the boyfriend or the cup, it's quite devastating. So then we've got to look, first of all, we're attached to it. And because you're attached to it, you want it to be there all the time, which means you're projecting onto it a lie. You're projecting onto it a characteristic that it will never break because you desperately can't bear the thought, but cups are impermanent. Cup is made of fragile stuff. And even if you let it sit there for a few hundred years, it would eventually disintegrate. So this is how we are with everything. That's the thing with Tom and the example of Tom and Nicole. And I love this woman. I don't want to be mean about her, but it was such a vivid statement. In this long interview in Vanity Fair, when she was still with Tom, and she said at the end, and we will be together until we're 80. Now, analyze this, Megan. I mean, we say these things, but first of all, it's not possible to prove that as a scientific fact because you're not clairvoyant. You don't know all the things that might happen or will happen. But the point is, because when you're attached to each other and everything is going beautifully and your attachment's getting what it wants and you're happy and everything's marvelous, you project onto that relationship a quality that it literally doesn't have, which is permanence until another 60 years. It's just not possible. But we project it that because we can't bear the thought of not having the relationship. So we project lies onto things. Whereas if we look at the most simple example of ordinary things like relationships, trees, houses, bodies, they are changing moment by moment, just organically. I mean, if we look in the mirror now and you compare how you looked when you were 16, we're quite different. We're continuously changing every second since we're 16, but that's why we don't like it, because we're so attached to ourselves. We can't bear the thought that we're changing, and we certainly can't bear the thought that we'll die. So we're living in denial of reality. That's what it is. And that's really one way of saying what Buddha's saying. We've got these layers and layers and layers of viewpoints in our mind, so subtle that we don't think they're viewpoints. They're basically assumptions. And we're dumping those assumptions onto the external world. And we believe in our assumptions. And that's when reality and our assumptions meet. That's why we suffer. Does that make sense, Megan? Good. This is Buddha's view across the board. And there's different levels of these wrong assumptions. But the permanent, impermanent one is a good example, you know. And then the tragedy is when attachment always gets what it wants, and that's what we call happiness, then of course, Nicole was in bliss. That's why she said, we'll be together till we're 80. But interestingly, I'll never forget the next sentence she said was, and of course, if we won't be together until we're 80, I will be devastated. At least she considered the possibility. And then sure enough, they did. In fact, the relationship did end. I remember reading another interview with her, and in fact, she was devastated. And then her mother told her to get out of the fetal position and get on with her life, you know. So this is the point. When everything's going beautifully, because we're so attached to it, we can't bear the thought that it won't happen, that it'll never end, that it will end. And then when it does end and you go crashing down to despair, this is the tragedy, Megan. We then can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And now we think the bad thing will never end. And that's why we kill ourselves. but everything changes. And if we can see and know, even as the bad thing is happening, that it won't last forever, it gives you optimism. And even as you're saying those words, you're seeing something in it. And that's what my friend in prison, Sonny, is such a classic example, this living hell of 17 years on death row, or 12 years and then 5 years off, accused of killing 2 policemen, completely innocent, lost her children, her parents died, husband executed. She never lost the plot. She realized she could change her mind. It must have been a living hell, but she kept her sanity by changing the way she saw all of this. So she was always optimistic. She was always positive. She kept her mind that way. So then everything, so she navigated it all without going crazy. Do you understand what I'm saying, Megan? That's what we're talking about here. I mean, it's hard work. Might as well do it. We're the beneficiaries of it. It's not moral. It's not moralistic. It's not sort of meant to be making you suffer. It's practical, you know, because we know in one day, probably 27 things happen that our attachment doesn't want. So we might as well start to navigate it and learn to accept those things, still try to change them. I mean, that's what the interesting point about my friend Sunny in prison. She didn't, when she was accepting all this, she wasn't just giving up. She never stopped working on her freedom. She never stopped. So she got her freedom eventually. She didn't become passive, in other words. So seeing things as they are, realizing things are impermanent, doesn't mean becoming passive and indifferent. No, it's just being realistic, and then you can do things better. So I met many people in prison. I worked with people for many years in prison who go mad in prison because they're so horrible. So when you go crazy, you can't do anything to help yourself. But she didn't go crazy, so she continued to help herself, and she managed to be successful and get out of prison because she never gave up, you know. So it's just wisdom. It's being very skillful. And of course, it's hard work, because the Buddha's saying all these assumptions are very deep in our bones, you know. Do you understand, Megan? Yes. Good. Thank you, darling.
Got it. Okay, I have another question now.
Good, darling. Good.
And I jumped in late, so forgive me.
Okay.
But how did you talk about COVID and equanimity yet? And could you talk a little bit about the situation and equanimity? Because it just seems to be,
Exactly.
at least for me, ebbing and flowing with, you know, fear, reality, fear, reality, fear, reality.
It's just a variation of what we're talking about. You know, like there's my friend Sunny in prison, and it seemed pretty concrete. She didn't have a key. She couldn't walk out the door. So here we are with COVID. No matter how much as we don't like it, we can't escape it. We can't, the whole world. I mean, okay, if you want to go to Australia and New Zealand, you're going to find no COVID. They got like 1 new case a day because they conquered it, okay? Because they were pretty strict. I think if America had done the things that Australia did, there'd be a civil war, you know? But they managed to completely conquer COVID-19. It's like 1 new case a day or something. They're incredible. So if you want to escape COVID-19, you've got to go to Australia, okay? Meanwhile, you can't escape it. So this is where the point of the reality for Sunny in prison. She was staring the face of prison daily, this nightmare daily. So COVID-19, it's not that intense. So we've got to find a way to navigate. And we've got to be cautious, wear our masks, keep away from strangers. We've got to be practical, don't be nihilistic. And then, you know, do what you can. And then meanwhile, try and use the experience to know about your own mind, to be steady, and then to have compassion, try and help other people. Because all we can do, it's like being in a war zone. The best often comes out of us in a war zone. You read it, and I mean, I'm very moved by some of the stories I'm reading about marvelous things that people are doing for others, even children, during these times. So they're a great opportunity to work on yourself, but also to help others, you know, and that's what keeps us sane. That's what keeps us optimistic, I think, because life is difficult and life is bad. Life is suffering. Bad things happen. It's a fact, you know. Do you understand? One step at a time, darling. And it's impermanent. It will change. It's not forever. No matter how bad it is, and it is bad, it won't be forever. So we just got to have courage when things get bad. I mean, this is where, you know, like I think of when I was working on a biography of a Tibetan Lama. So these Tibetans had been sitting up in the mountains, pretty isolated for their 1200 years when they were Buddhist. Very few strangers ever came. Buddhism was 99, Tibetans were 99% Buddhist. It was like, if you want to think of something as completely real and permanent and solid, their Buddhism, their monasteries were like that. They didn't see anything else for like 1,000 years. So then it was shocking and horrifying when all this business started to happen in 1950. All the Chinese came over the eastern border of Tibet, started being military, and all these Tibetans had only known this for centuries, it was not possible for them to think it would become this nightmare. But every day things kept getting worse. Things kept getting worse. The places were bombed. Dalai Lama escaped. Hundreds of thousands of people killed, and it keeps getting worse. So all you can do is be reasonable, keep your equanimity, don't go crazy, and try and help others, and do your best. Sometimes we can't change anything, Megan. We have to recognize that, but attachment is desperate to think. That's why we don't realize impermanence properly. We think it's going to change soon, but it might not. So we've got to sort of not expect the worst, being negative, no, but no, this is life sometimes. And of course, Buddhism has these very detailed descriptions about karma, the law of karma, and why things happen. But, you know, it's just we've got to try and find a way to be optimistic, no matter what. Not being silly, not being like Pollyanna, but otherwise, if you don't become optimistic, you despair. And when you despair, you can't help yourself and you can't help others. That's why my friend in Sunny was so beneficial, so powerful, because she didn't lose the plot, you know, no matter how bad it got. First, you can't even imagine you're a hippie and you've been accused of killing 2 policemen and you're innocent. You can't believe that no one believes you, and it keeps getting worse, and your husband gets executed, you lose your children, your parents die. You can't think of anything worse happening. She kept going, she kept going, she kept going. Now she's this little old lady living in Ireland with her ex-husband, who was also accused of killing 2 policemen in Ireland, and they're now helping other people who get out of prison who have been accused. You know, they're helping other people. So life is very tough. Life can be really tough, Megan. Yeah, and we're communicating. Yes? Any other questions, people? Anything else to say?
Robina?
Yes.
No. Just when you were just saying life can be tough, I found I went through a very bad period of time about 10 years ago. And a lot of things were happening. I didn't understand why they were happening. It made no sense. Yes. But it wasn't until I understood sort of karma and your explanation of how the different ways karma ripens.
Yes, yes.
That it kind of took the pressure off.
That's interesting.
Beating myself up now and putting it in a bigger context, right?
That's it.
Okay, now I understand what this is. I'm not going nuts.
That's right.
And what I need to do around it and what it means. It just made a huge difference.
That's really good, Lorna. I mean, I know I find the same with karma. Some people can't stand the view of karma, but I find the same thing. And I found many of my friends in prison, it's a revelation for them, because I think one of the biggest, one of the worst agonies in our lives, which is our materialist view, I think, is it's not being arrogant. In the materialist view, if we have the view of materialism, which is a philosophical view we all live according to. Mummy made us, daddy made us, our mind is the brain. We start in our mother's womb. We don't have a view of a creator, and we don't have a view of karma. They're the 2 other views in the world, aren't they? So then we just think we don't know why things happen. Mostly when things happen, we really think it's a scientific truth that no one knows why things happen. We say, oh, we haven't found the reasons yet. So we're living mostly when bad things happen. We live mostly in fear and panic. Why is this happening to me? One of the main reasons we suffer when bad things happen is because we don't have an explanation for why. We're pulling our hair out. Why is this happening to me? I don't deserve it. And we can't get past that. And I can see within people in prison, at the same time as I heard about Sunny, I read about another person who was also innocent, also on death row. So he was typical in the way we all are. He went out of his brain screaming daily, I did not rape and kill that woman. I did not rape and kill that woman. He went completely mad. In other words, he couldn't get past the fact that this bad thing happened, and he had no explanation of why, and he couldn't get past, why is this happening to me? Look at the world, Lorna. Now, everything is viewpoint. We've all got different viewpoints on this planet. So if you're a devoted Christian, a really devoted Christian, you will have faith in God. You know God has a plan, and you are content that God knows what's going on. You don't need to know because you have faith in him. I find that view pretty profound. I would never criticize that view. And look at the consequence. You accept reality. Look at the Muslims who've got so much faith. It's God's will. It's incredible. I don't criticize that. I would never criticize that. I think it's a profound view. I don't have that view. That's not Buddha's view. But I think, look at the, I remember one time reading an interview years ago about a Malaysian mummy and daddy whose daughter had been killed in an air crash. And they were interviewed and they asked, how do you feel about the death of your daughter? They said, we are peaceful. She belongs to God and he has taken her back. Now, many people criticize that view and think it's monstrous. How dare we criticize those people? That's a viewpoint. Everything is a viewpoint in the end, Lorna. And that viewpoint gives them peace. Well, go for it, baby. I'm not going to complain. It's not the Buddha's view, but it's not the materialist view, but at least it causes them to be peaceful. Do you understand? Now, the karmic view, which is very different. I remember I always use the example of these young nuns in New York. This is back in 2003 when Richard Gere invited the Dalai Lama to New York. I often tell this story. And that was when I was running our prison project. And so he invited many people like me to come who were working with people in prison. And he invited 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison. They all came, they met the Dalai Lama and they had a wonderful conference. It was a very moving day. Well, Richard Gere also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns who'd been imprisoned in Lhasa. So, 99% of Tibetans are Buddhist, right? And these little nuns have been nuns since they were tiny little girls. They don't hurt a fly, They've done nothing wrong. There they are in prison being tortured and sexually abused. So they're talking about their suffering. But it was, first of all, this is a really interesting point, actually. They were talking about their suffering, and it was very evident to all the Americans. The Americans is like 20 people, prisoners, former prisoners, and there's a whole cross-section of Americans, like black, white, Puerto Rican, Mexican, male, female, and people like me. And it was a very moving day. And all this anguish and suffering and the racism and the sexism and the wrong sentencing and the blah, blah, blah of suffering and being in prison, right? Horrible places. So these young women, it was very clear to all the Americans that these young women, that if you wanted to quantify suffering, theirs was worse than everybody else's. But second, you could really see clearly they weren't anguished. They weren't angry. And this is very puzzling for us in the materialist world, because the view of the materialist world, I'm not criticizing, it's a viewpoint that nobody knows why these things happen. Nobody knows why bad things happen to good people, or for that matter, why good things happen to bad people. We just don't have answers. We believe our mothers, we come from our mother, we believe our mind is the brain, and we track our past back to our grandma, grandpa, and back to the monkeys. That's our philosophical view. Well, the body can track it back, but as we know from the Buddhist view, which is a very different view, we bring our own mind with us. Our consciousness is beginningless. We don't track your consciousness back either to a creator or to your parents. They're the main views in the world, right? That's not the Buddha's view. The Buddha's view is that our consciousness is its own continuity that goes back and back and back and back and back, which is a very different view. That's the one, that's my working hypothesis, as I like to say. That's the Buddha's explanation. So these young women, these Tibetans, you see, they've been Buddhists in there for like 1,200 years. This has been their view of the universe. We don't realize this in the West because we think we're the center of the universe. But karma, the law of karma, has been around for 3,000 years among the Indians, and it's in the texts, it's deeply taught, it's profoundly presented. And then Buddha comes along, and it's one of the major views that he takes of the entire universe, and is explained in great depth in all the literature, okay? So these young women, in the same way that for us, it's completely, we just accepted in the bones of our being that mummy made us, daddy made us, my suffering is coming from them, my happiness comes from this. We've got a whole different set of views of the materialist world, which we take for granted. Well, they have their views, which they take for granted. So their assumption is that their mind came from before. They created the cause to get born into this life. They created the cause from their past actions to get sent to prison. They created the cause from their past actions to be tortured and sexually abused. There's very strong karmic connection from past history with these torturers. That's their view in the bones of their being. That's the philosophy they live according to. So having that view means you have an explanation of why things happened. So you don't pull your hair out saying, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve it. You just don't have that view. It just doesn't exist in your mind. Do you understand my point, Lorna? So then, therefore, at the end of their talk, there were tears, they were sad. And as one of them said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we knew we must have harmed them in the past, but also because we know, because of the actions they did to us, that they will suffer in the future. That's the basis of their compassion for those torturers, not hate. So it's a very different view of the universe, isn't it? But the point I'm trying to get at here is, and this is the point that Buddha's making, whatever views we have about everything second by second determines the way we experience everything.
Mhm.
That's the point. That's why we have to know our own minds. We have to unpack and unravel our assumptions and look at them deeply at a level of depth and subtlety of analysis that we don't even have in our psychology. Because in our psychology, we're addicted to looking into the past of the mummy and the daddy and the past events and the chemicals and the DNA and the genes and the external world. Buddha's expertise is the internal world. It's a very different view.
Well,
Yep.
and when I had,
Megan's smiling. So you like this, do you, Megan? Good. There you go.
well, and what I found through it, Robina, was that once I had sort of realized that, I was able actually to start to not be angry at.
That's exactly right, John. That's why those young women
it.
weren't angry. 'Cause
Yeah,
anger, listen to Lorna. What does anger say? Anger says, how dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. Those nuns didn't have that view.
Yeah.
And the other thing, Lorna, and this is the point, we tend only to look at karma when it comes to the bad things, but we take all the good for granted, and we should not. Every second that anything good has ever happened in your life, Lorna, that is not accidental. It's the fruit of your past virtue, your goodness, your kindness, your generosity. It's like your life is your garden, and whatever's in your garden, honey, all the good qualities are like your flowers, and all the bad ones are like your weeds. And who planted them? You did, baby. There's this ownership when it comes to karma. And that's why when you have the view of karma, initially you start with that, you give up anger, you give up being a victim, you give up blaming, you take responsibility, but for the good as well. And then you become really empowered because you realize we're the boss.
well, and I want to prevent anything like that from happening.
Precisely, darling.
Lives.
That's the learning. When you look in your garden and you see all the rubbish weeds that you forgot to pull out, the learning is I must pull them out and not grow them again.
Yes.
That's
exactly.
the learning. That's exactly right, Lorna. It's exactly right, darling.
Yeah, it's great stuff. I love it.
Good. No, me too. Exactly. Very good point. What else, people? Nothing else? Busy night tonight, talking about all kinds of things. Impermanence, karma, the mind, compassion, emptiness, the whole lot. We've done the entire path. What else? Yes, Wendy.
I heard a podcast with you recently, Robina, where somebody asked about a friend of theirs, a woman who was suicidal, and she had mental illness, and she was very disturbed in the mind, and there was some sense that maybe a spirit had gotten into their mind.
Yes.
How do you tell the difference?
I understand that. It's a very good point, Wendy. And that's because it's not a view that we accept in our culture, then we would sort of put everybody in this blanket category of schizophrenic and insane and hearing voices. But I think once you even, I can only say, okay, the Tibetan doctors, for example, their expertise is pretty amazing because they learn about all the subtle physical energies. They learn all about karma, and the really good Tibetan doctors can, just by looking at you, they can know immediately whether it's your mind or whether you're possessed by a spirit. And the great lamas are even clairvoyant. They can see it very clearly. And all I know is many, many, many people I've talked to come to me, and it's not an uncommon thing on the planet. So many people hear voices. So many people have visits from spirits in their dreams. Weird people come, but many people never talk about it because they're scared. But this really fits with the Buddhist view of the universe. These different kinds of beings. Animals we can see, humans we can see, but there are some beings called gods who are more subtle, and they're a bit like angels. They're positive, Then there are some that are really, really suffering from incredible grasping and attachment, and they can be very harmful and very negative. So in many, I remember one old lama, when he visited Europe at some point, he went to Spain, and then people took him to this hospital, a mental hospital, and he just looked around so sad because he's clairvoyant, he's got high qualities. He said, so sad, all these people just possessed by spirits. So, I've got many people over the years, if I take this view, I take the Buddhist view, that's my philosophy. So I take the view of spirits. And then when people talk to me and tell me about their experiences, because I totally take them as it fits with this view. And so you can hear it so clearly. I mean, people have been harmed, it's incredible suffering. It's not an uncommon thing. And many of the lamas can see it with their own clairvoyance, and but you can help, you can get the spirits to go. There's different things you can do to help the spirits leave, It's a really common way that many, many people suffer. It's very interesting. And you can tell first of all, it's hard to sell initially because it could be just the person's own crazy mind,
I know.
Sometimes when the people tell the story, you can hear immediately. I know there's one woman, there's so many stories. There's one woman in Canada who emailed me out of the blue. She found my email and we talked quite a bit on the email, and she could hardly put two words together in her email because she told me that a couple of years ago, suddenly she was sitting in a cafe and this energy came into her left side really strongly. So of course, if you're cynical and don't believe in this, you're just going to lock her up for being schizophrenic. But if I take it as a given that she's speaking the truth, right? And she said, since that time, they've possessed her day and night. They abuse her, they shout at her. She sometimes can't sleep for weeks. They insult her. Unbelievable suffering. And she was so kind of struggling to try and find it. I got the lamas to do prayers. I did so many things. And eventually I stopped hearing from her. I think she told her father and they locked her up and gave her drugs and things. Maybe she's a bit better. I don't know. But it's many experiences like this. I've got many experiences from lamas as well who tell these stories, But of course you have to take the view that there is a realm of existence where these very suffering beings, these suffering spirits do exist. And then they have a lot of contact with humans. They can make people crazy. People hear voices. It's such a common thing, a very common way that many people suffer. And initially it's often hard to tell the difference. Yes, it is. But the Tibetans have many practices to help people, And the high lamas can really see things and can do very powerful things to help make the spirits go and things like that. I remember one story.
Is that still due to karma? Whether if the spirit, it's all still
exactly, Andrew. We've got a lot of history with each other. Basically, think of it this way: from life after life after life, we keep bumping into different sentient beings. So in this life, let's say, good or bad relationships. If you and I have a good relationship, it's because of past virtue. But if you and I have a bad relationship and I beat you up and steal from you every day, that's due to our past history. Well, it can be exactly the same that you've got history with a certain being who in this life is born as a spirit, who's intensely attached to being around you, to harm you, or to do terrible things to you. Instead of being in a human body, they're in a spirit form. That's the difference. But it's karmic connection, there's no question. Strong karmic connection. Remember, they're funny stories, but they're kind of tragic. There's one story about our amazing Lama, Geshe Lama Kontrok, a great yogi who spent years and years in the mountains meditating, and he was very highly realized, clairvoyant, had bodhicitta, understood emptiness, all these realizations, a highly evolved being. So anyway, he meditated for many years in isolation, right on the top of Nepal, near the border of Tibet, totally isolated, where Milarepa used to meditate in the 11th century. Anyway, he took care of the people in the village. So one time he was called to go to the nunnery. One of the nuns was freaking out. She was kind of going crazy. She was in the bed, and there he walked in, and then he could see, because he's clairvoyant, he could see immediately that she's possessed by this being who died recently, who'd been a local villager, who died because of his strong attachment. And I'll tell you the story, it's kind of funny. He's possessing this nun, because these lamas know how to handle these spirits. They can see them, they're clairvoyant. So, and they know that they're there because they want something. They're super attached to things. So Geshe Lama Kontrok said to the spirit in the nun, "What do you want?" And he said, "I want my pink thermos with the white flowers. I want my pink thermos with the white flowers." So sure enough, there was the pink thermos with the white flowers, and the nuns remembered that a week or two ago, this old villager had given the nun this pot of tea, the thermos of tea, and she forgot to give the thermos back. So he's got all this attachment to his thermos and resentful, and he dies, and that causes him to be born as his spirit. It sounds hilarious. So, this is at least an explanation. And even the spirit knew Geshe-la because he was a local villager, and he was really distressed the spirit is disembodied, right? And when you're driven by attachment, you've got no physical body, you don't quite know what's going on. And he was in tears saying, I don't know where to go. I don't know where to go, you know? So again, because he's got power, he's able to help the spirit leave and hopefully get another human rebirth. And but the thing was this thermos, because they're so attached to their possessions. So this is attachment to a thermos, people. Would you please give up attachment before you die to your house, your husband, your children, your money, your pension plan, your kettle? You don't want to get bored as a spirit and chase around for your bloody kettle. I know it sounds funny, but it's wonderful. I love this story. So they, you know, so then they had to give so what they do is to cut the connection for the poor spirit and the thermos, they give the thermos away. So it cuts the connection, you know. There's so many stories like this. Of course, you don't have to believe them. I'm just telling you, this is the Buddha's view, you know, this is Tibetan. The Buddha's view. These spirits, they're very suffering due to attachment. So they flit from pillar to post, chasing away. And that's where, let's say Andrew and I got a really intense relationship. And then I die with lots of anger. I'll get born as a spirit, really heavy, and I will possess him. That's what happened to that poor Canadian lady. She had some karma with these two beings, and the karma ripened a particular day, and these spirits came barging in and took over her body and made her completely insane and brutalized and harmed her every day. There's so many stories like this, I can't tell you. And so this is the view I'm taking. I'm not clairvoyant. I can't tell you it's true, but it fits with the Buddhist explanation of the universe. So much of the mental suffering, people hearing voices. And there are different mantras you can do. I remember one fellow in Australia, a young man, he came and he said out of the blue, started just recently, this being's talking to him, shouting at him in his head all the time. That's why doctors think they're crazy and give him pills. They can be crazy. They can be actually crazy, or it can be simply possessed by spirits. So this spirit was railing, abusing and shouting at him, never stopping day and night. You know, he was so distressed. And there's just one particular mantra that I knew, that I'd heard about, so I gave it to him. And he emailed me next day and said they'd stopped, you know. I mean, these things happen, right? But sometimes it's so heavy, nothing changes, nothing helps because the karma is so strong, you know. But it's a very different explanation of the universe. And the number of people who come to me who in their dreams, because the dream mind is more subtle. And so when a dream mind can see the past and see the future, people can have clairvoyant experiences. And this particular woman, I remember in Puerto Rico, she was almost attached to all this idea, all these beings and spirits would come and like her and praise her. But now they were becoming heavy and starting to harm her. And she was freaking out, you know, because people can get very seduced by all this, thinking they're special. I mean, it's a very fascinating whole other way of seeing the world, isn't it? So there's the answer to your question. Some food for thought there. And I've had two experiences of spirits. Just, you know, sometimes I mean, one time vividly in England years ago, I woke up in the middle of the night, crystal clear, the window behind me. I knew some being was coming in, crystal clear. And he came down and lay on top of me and suffocated me. Then I just said a mantra, and then he got up and he walked through the door. And the same when I was in Myanmar, Burma, in one place. And the friend next door, he freaked out and he hopped into bed with his mum because the spirit was touching him. So he hopped into bed with his mum, and the same spirit came and suffocated me as well. I've had two experiences. This is not an uncommon experience. People have this all the time, but we don't know what it is. You know, we just laugh about it or crack jokes, you know, call them. So ghost is, in other words, people who haunt houses. It's exactly the point. That guy was attached to his thermos, but people are attached to a place. So they get reborn as a spirit there. And that's real. That's the way Buddhism says, you know, and that's attachment. Attachment is the worst thing. That's why you've got to give up attachment before you die. It'll just cause you to be born as a spirit and born as a bloody ghost in your own house. What are you going to, or possessing your husband? You don't want that. Or trying to get your thermos back. God Almighty. So give up attachment, please, people. See it as impermanent, relax, and look forward to a nice human rebirth without spirits interfering with you. It's a very interesting way to see the world, isn't it?
So for people that we call schizophrenics, are you saying some of them might be possessed by spirits, but some of them,
yes,
but some of them, the voices may actually be created by their own mind?
Yes, for sure. People just got very, very, very crazy, busy mind. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's a person emailing me now. I can just, my sense, I'm not that wise, but I can feel it's just her own mind out of control. She's lost the plot, you know. She's not hearing voices at all, but she talks like that. Other people, you can sort of feel there's a difference if you really, that's not an uncommon thing. And it can be people's just very crazy minds out of control. They lose, you know, they get sort of, there's no thermostat, kind of what the world calls bipolar, you know, out of control. You know. One of my sisters had that for a while, completely berserk. Not so much hearing voices, but just out of control. You know, imagine she was Mozart and could do things, didn't sleep for weeks and completely uncontrolled mind. That's a symptom of it. But certainly some can be possessed by spirits. And there's, I mean, drugs can, I don't know how drugs help, but drugs maybe help. Maybe it helps the spirit go away or something. I don't know. But drugs certainly do seem to subdue the person a bit, you know, help it under control. There's so many stories of people. It's so common, so common. That's how they'd say, Carly, yes. And that's why, I mean, people, one person I know, she's for like 30, 40 years, has got these two beings and a certain kind of spirit called Nagas. And they've got a very strong connection with the Dharma. They want the Dharma. And whenever the lama's around, these beings, they're like snakes and they come out. And this person, this woman I know, she said they live at just about here. She said 2 of them. And she said they live, no matter what the lamas do, they can never get rid of them. So she just lives with these beings and they come out sometimes and she kind of writhes and make weird sounds. You know, her husband understands luckily and she just lives with them. Even the lamas one time spent hours trying to get them to leave, but nothing could make them leave. It's very interesting. So many stories like this. Yeah, interesting way to finish our teaching, isn't it? All about spirits. It's another whole view of reality, isn't it? But I mean, you listen to people, the number of people you meet when you speak these stories, people, oh yeah, I got that. I understand that. I've had that experience. It's so common, you know. And even, you know, another one, what do they call it? In Australia, we call it cot deaths, when little babies just die. What do you call them in America? Cribbed. What do they call them, Carly?
SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome.
That's it. I would think that's spirits. That's a common way, that spirit. The 2 times I had the spirits, they came and they suffocated me. They suffocate you. They lie on top of you. They suffocate you. So and they often, people are very vulnerable, and like babies is a perfect example. And it's due to karma. They literally suffocate them and they die. I remember one poor mother had like 5 babies that they all died that way, and she was put into prison for murder. And I wouldn't be surprised it's spirits, but nobody thinks like this. You know, it's so tragic. No explanation, no medical explanation at all, isn't it? We call it cot deaths in Australia. It's more colloquial. Spirits literally take the life out of, and animals, they can possess animals as well. I remember we had one dog, a red setter, when we were kids, and she went mad. She just raged on and circled. She walked around in circles all day, all night. She was possessed by a spirit. That would have been, you know, it's very not uncommon as well. Animals, they possess animals. Because many spirits are living all over the place. They're living all in the nature, they're in the trees. Maybe you go pee under a tree and it's a spirit's house and they'll get annoyed with you and they'll cause you sickness. That was one way too that spirits they talk about. I had sciatica, really severe sciatica, about 2 years in one leg. I couldn't walk more than a few feet. I had to sit down. I could stand okay, but I couldn't walk. I could sit. That's right. But it was awful. And then Lama Zopa checked and said it was caused by harm by spirits. They also can cause sickness. You upset them because they're all over the place. They're living everywhere. And you might upset them. You might bump into them or upset them. So they're going to cause you to get sickness. I don't know how it works. So, I mean, for 2 years, no matter what treatments I got. And then I remember one time, some people at Kopan heard about it and asked one of the lamas what prayers to do to help me. And I didn't know about this, but the next day I knew something had changed. So I went to an acupuncturist and the pain went away, because the spirit interference had gone away. You know, this is very not uncommon as well. And the Tibetan doctors can tell this by just checking your pulses and looking at you and looking at your urine, you know. So it's very interesting. Should go home. Look at the time. At 9 o'clock for you, 10 o'clock for me. Okay, you people. So this is our last class, isn't it, Andrew?
Yes, until next time.
Until next time, darling, exactly. So make the most. So we'll just think. Don't put the prayers up. Just do it in our own words. Okay, make it very sincere. We first think. Just think. Here we've been these 3 times, 4 times together, whatever. All these hours we've been together. All these thoughts we've had. All these ideas. These teachings of the Buddha. Don't just swallow them whole. Don't just reject them. Think about them. Process them. Take the advice that you can take and put it into practice, and leave the rest on the back burner. Just leave it there. You know. That's the main thing. And so the practice is what? To use this information to help you develop your amazing potential so you can be of benefit to others. These are the 2 wings of the bird, wisdom and compassion. So we think any of the good that's come out of all these teachings, each one of us, including me, may we do exactly that. And then may compassion and love and this courageous attitude of bodhicitta may it grow and grow and grow in the hearts of all sentient beings. And may we all live good lives, long lives, so we can continue to work on ourselves and be a benefit to others. May all our teachers live long lives, because the world needs them badly. You know. Changchub semchog rinpoche ma ke panam ke gu chig ke pa nyam pa me pa yang gong ne gong du Habashong. All right. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Carly. Thank you,
Yes.
Beth. Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lauren in Los Angeles. Everybody else that I haven't talked to. Mary. Much love. Thank
And
you.
Venerable Robina, from all of us at Gampo Ludup and all of us here tonight and who have been here over the teachings, I'm offering you a kata. And I just want to, we feel very fortunate to have you, and we thank you for your time and your knowledge and your compassion. You really just have a way of speaking that is so accessible and clear and blunt, and I think a lot of us really identify with that.
I'm very happy.
Yeah, so please come again and teach us some more and live long.
I promise I'll do that part. I'll do my best. My birthday's on the 20th. I'm having a day off. I'm driving to, I'll be 76 on Sunday, much younger than Betty. Betty's 104. I always joke about Betty's age. She's 10 years older than me, I think. I can't remember. But anyway, it's my 76th birthday on Sunday. So I'm taking a day off, and Charmaine and I are going to drive to Crestone, where Mary and Harry are. I'm going to have 2 days off, okay, for my birthday. Thank you, darling.
Blessings for your
Much love,
birthday.
everybody. Thank you, darling.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much.